Elizabeth Wilson sat quietly sipping her coffee in her new home at Oakwood Heights as the morning sun streamed through the windows. Her laptop, perched on the spacious kitchen island, displayed the latest investment report. Though moving boxes were still scattered throughout the newly built house, there was an undeniable air of sophistication about it. The deep green shutters contrasted beautifully against the cream-colored walls, while the red brick fireplace and the solid mahogany front door added touches of elegance to every corner. The three-story mansion was one of the most talked-about properties in this exclusive Boston suburb. Elizabeth and her husband Michael had meticulously planned its purchase, carefully selecting it as a symbol of their new life together. "Darling, I think I can come home early today," she said while calling Michael, her eyes wandering to the rose garden outside the window. The buds, not yet in full bloom, glistened with morning dew. "How about dinner at our new home? I've arranged for the chef to prepare a special course." "Sorry, but I can't today. An important meeting came up," Michael replied, his voice lacking its usual warmth. Recently, his hours had become irregular, and he'd been spending less time with family. Elizabeth let out a small sigh as she sent an email to her mother Patricia, confirming their weekend brunch plans. Their elegant brunches at Stephanie's on Newbury Street had become something of a mother-daughter ritual. Since her father's death, her mother had become increasingly social, showing particular favoritism toward her younger sister Amanda. After finishing an afternoon client meeting at her investment advisory firm, Elizabeth was adjusting the sleeves of her navy Ralph Lauren suit when she noticed a message from her sister Amanda. "Sis, I'm so excited about your housewarming party. I heard there's going to be a surprise. Everyone will be shocked." Though something felt off, Elizabeth sent a non-committal reply. Her sister had been unusually cheerful lately. Amanda's behavior had been concerning, wearing new Versace dresses and constantly acquiring luxury brand bags, even after quitting her accounting job at Wilson Enterprises. During weekend brunch, her mother, dressed in a Chanel tweed suit, seemed unusually restless. "Beth, don't you think it's time you seriously considered having children? Remaining childless." Elizabeth froze at the sudden comment. Her mother knew about the pain of 3 years of fertility treatments. That night, while tidying Michael's study, she found an unfamiliar cell phone in the back of a drawer. The screen showed unread messages from Amanda. "The hotel yesterday was lovely. Let's wrap everything up soon." Elizabeth quietly returned the phone to its original place. The next day, she visited a private investigator's office. She promised the investigator substantial compensation to investigate her husband and Amanda's activities. 2 weeks remained until the housewarming party, and over 100 guests had already RSVP'd. Her father-in-law Richard, chairman of Wilson Enterprises, would certainly attend. Michael's presence as a company executive had been growing increasingly prominent. The celebration at their new home was meant to cement their family's status in high society. The Wilson family's reputation in Boston's upper circles was supposed to become unshakable. Elizabeth smiled quietly while gazing at the roses beginning to bloom in the garden. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The champagne tower glasses had already been ordered. The stage was being set for unveiling an irreversible truth. As dusk fell, she made a silent vow while clutching the keys to her new home. This house would never be taken from her. Justice would prevail. The gentle early June sunshine enveloped the new mansion at Oakwood Heights. At 3 in the afternoon, Elizabeth was walking through the garden with the party planner for final arrangements. String lights had been elegantly decorated on the white pergola among the fragrant roses, and white linen tables were neatly arranged on the lawn. The sound of clear water echoed from the fountain as the dedicated gardeners rushed through their final preparations. "Mrs. Wilson, we'll set up the champagne tower here," the young planner continued explaining while holding her notebook. "We've arranged for 300 crystal glasses, 25 staff members, and the menu has been specially curated by 3 Michelin-starred chef Jean-Pierre." Elizabeth nodded with satisfaction. "Wonderful. The weather is my only concern now." As she walked across the dewy lawn, she privately rehearsed tonight's plan. "No need to worry. The forecast calls for clear skies until evening. And even if something changes, we have perfect backup plans for indoor arrangements." The main hall chandelier was professionally polished just yesterday. Elizabeth smiled quietly as she climbed the marble stairs of her new home. Everything was proceeding according to plan. It was as if a perfect stage set was being assembled. Back in her study, she took out a USB drive from a locked desk drawer. It contained all the evidence, decisive proof of her husband's betrayal, her sister's embezzlement, and her mother's complicity. Photos, recordings, and transaction records collected by the private investigator, everything would be revealed tonight. Last night, Elizabeth had done her final review. Records of fraudulent transfers from Wilson Enterprises, photos of Michael and Amanda's secret meetings, and evidence that her mother had known about and covered up their relationship. Everything was perfectly in place. At 5 o'clock, the first staff members began arriving. Catering staff in white uniforms meticulously arranged the table settings one after another. Under the crystal chandeliers, florists made final adjustments to luxurious arrangements of white Casablanca lilies and roses. In the wine cellar, the sommelier was checking the carefully selected champagne and wines. Tonight's centerpiece was specially ordered magnum bottles of Dom Perignon. They would be at the perfect temperature when poured into glasses. "Miss, it's time to change," Mary, the elderly housekeeper, gently called out. Having served the Connor family for over 30 years, she seemed to sense what was in Elizabeth's heart. "Tonight will be a special evening, won't it?" Elizabeth headed to the master bedroom on the 3rd floor and changed into the prepared ivory Carolina Herrera cocktail dress. Around her neck sparkled the diamond necklace her late father had given her. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she strengthened her resolve. Tonight, everything would end. After 6 o'clock, guests began arriving one after another. Representatives of Boston's high society appeared in the garden one by one. Judges, corporate executives, university trustees, everything was prepared to expose Michael and Amanda's betrayal before them. A classical quartet's live performance melded into the early summer air. Mozart's string quartet played elegantly. "Beth, this is wonderful," her mother Patricia, who arrived first, kissed her daughter's cheek. Today, her usual perfume seemed oddly irritating. Beside her mother, Amanda stood in a flashy Versace dress, seeming somewhat unsettled. Her abdomen appeared slightly swollen. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today for the unveiling of our new home," Elizabeth began her greeting with a perfect smile. No one in the room noticed the tremor in her voice. But her eyes gleamed coldly. At 7 o'clock, Michael arrived with his father-in-law Richard. Her husband, dressed in a gray Armani suit, showed traces of discomfort in his expression. His usual arrogant attitude had receded, replaced by a notably nervous demeanor. "Time for a toast," the butler quietly announced, and champagne was poured into all the glasses. The crystal glasses beautifully reflected the twilight. Tonight's moon had not yet risen. Mother Patricia suddenly stood up. "Everyone, I have an important announcement too." Her voice rang out across the garden as she raised her glass. Elizabeth remembered how she had prepared months for this moment. Then her mother's voice continued. Your sister is getting married, to your husband. Silence fell over the garden. Small gasps arose from among the guests. The scent of roses seemed to grow more intense for a moment. Michael turned toward Elizabeth with a cold smile. We don't need an infertile wife anymore. This house is ours. His voice no longer held any pretense of kindness. Amanda touched her stomach with an expression of superiority and said, You've packed your bags, right? Her sister's eyes held the same cruel light she'd known since childhood. Elizabeth slowly set down her glass and responded in a calm voice, Yes, of course. But first. She quietly handed her father-in-law the USB drive she had taken from her desk. The sleek black lacquered USB had the word truth engraved on it. Father, there's something I'd like you to see. At that moment, she could see her father-in-law's stern expression turning to anger. Richard Wilson's face flushed red with rage. The expression of a man who had always put the company's reputation first became distorted with fury. The eyes of those remaining at the party focused on Elizabeth and her father-in-law Richard. In the garden where night had fallen, only the sound of trembling hands holding champagne glasses broke the silence. Richard, seated in a luxury leather chair, slowly opened his laptop and inserted the USB drive. This is... Richard's voice trembled. The screen displayed confidential documents from Wilson Enterprises. Here was evidence that his son, this man, had completely betrayed the trust of the real estate development company with its 50-year history. Michael and Amanda's clever embezzlement scheme. Falsified transaction records. And the luxury condominiums, sports cars, and numerous pieces of jewelry purchased with those funds. Everything was perfectly documented with dated photographs and bank transaction records. Father, Elizabeth began explaining in a calm voice. These are the results of a 6-month investigation. The total amount of fraudulent transfers from your company amounts to approximately $5 million. According to Private Investigator International, this may only be the tip of the iceberg. Michael's face turned pale. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Father, this is a misunderstanding. All transactions were legitimate. Silence. Richard's angry voice echoed through the party venue. The crystal chandelier seemed to tremble in response to his fury. You've betrayed my trust, the company's credibility, everything? My father, the founder, with what thoughts did he build this company? As Amanda tried to frantically interrupt, new footage appeared on the screen. Images of the two of them entering and leaving the luxury Four Seasons hotel. Scenes of them having secret meetings while skipping executive board meetings. And evidence that Mother Patricia had known about their relationship and had actually been supporting them. Shopping at luxury boutiques, secret discussions at restaurants, everything was meticulously recorded. This is wrong. Mother's voice came out like a scream. But there was no more room for deception. Security cameras never lie. Dated photographs and recorded conversations. Digitally signed emails. Everything clearly demonstrated their guilt. Michael Wilson, Richard spoke in a solemn voice that trembled with anger. You are immediately dismissed from all positions at Wilson Enterprises. Your company shares will be confiscated as per the contract. All new projects under your supervision will be suspended. Try it if you can. Michael snarled. The collar of his expensive Armani suit was disheveled. I have rights to this house, this new mansion is in my name. Oh. Elizabeth smiled gracefully. A hint of victory showed in her expression. You mean the property documents for this house? She took out new documents. A leather binder with a property deed embossed in gold leaf gleamed. Actually, this house is solely in my name. With your signature. A murmur went through the venue. Michael's face contorted. Impossible, that can't be. Don't you remember? Elizabeth continued coldly. Last month, you signed the property documents as a token of trust. You said you wanted to give this new home to your beloved wife. Of course, it was all properly processed. James Albright, New England's top real estate lawyer, witnessed it. At that moment, a gentleman stood up from one corner of the party venue. The man in a Brooks Brothers luxury suit exuded an air of strictness. That's correct, said Attorney Albright. All procedures were conducted in full compliance with Massachusetts state law. There was no forgery or coercion whatsoever. Amanda let out a scream. Her Versace dress caught the light with her trembling. Sister, this is. Her perfect makeup began to run with tears. Think about the baby. The exact amount embezzled from the company, $5,362,847, Elizabeth announced the figure calmly. I demand immediate full restitution. I have already prepared calculations for all the cash misappropriated and assets purchased. Of course, I'm prepared to pursue criminal charges. I've investigated everything about Michael's secret child as well. Mother collapsed in tears. Even her Chanel tweed suit now looked pathetic. Beth, why, we're family. Family? Elizabeth's voice carried emotion for the first time. All her past suffering surfaced in her eyes. Someone who abandoned her daughter struggling with fertility treatments and encouraged an affair between her own sister and son-in-law has no right to speak of family. I saw your true nature after father died. Richard quietly stood up. All eyes in the venue focused on him again. His figure illuminated by moonlight looked like an avenging god. This party is now concluded, his voice dripped with deep disappointment and anger. Michael, Amanda, and Patricia. You will be notified of legal proceedings first thing tomorrow morning. We are considering freezing all assets and potential detention. Wait. Michael attempted one last resistance. I have 10 years of achievements, new development projects. Achievements? Richard's eyes flashed sharply. Elizabeth has proven that the majority of your accomplishments were fabricated. The waterfront redevelopment plan and South End complex facility were all inflated illusions. The crime of deceiving investors and destroying the company's credibility is severe. Amanda suddenly tried to run, but strong security guards were already positioned at the venue exits. Everything was according to Elizabeth's plan. This is your last chance, Elizabeth announced calmly. If you agree to voluntary repayment and resignation, we might consider foregoing criminal charges. But this offer expires tonight. Until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Michael's arrogant expression finally crumbled. All right. His voice was hoarse. I'll do everything as demanded. About Amanda's pregnancy too. About that, Elizabeth produced more documents. I also have evidence of her falsified pregnancy test records. Michael, you already have one child. A 10-year-old boy living in the Boston suburbs. Mother was still crying. But no one tried to comfort her anymore. Amanda just stood there in shock. Even her expensive dress now looked pathetic. As guests quietly departed, Elizabeth gazed at the roses in the garden. The fully bloomed white roses shone in the moonlight. Everything was over. No, a new beginning had arrived. Elizabeth, Richard quietly placed his hand on her shoulder. His touch carried a father's warmth. You are the true heir to the Wilson family. I want you to start as the company's vice president next week. Bring a new wind to Boston's real estate industry. Thank you, Father, Elizabeth smiled gently. But there are things I must take care of first. Indeed, Richard nodded. I'll mobilize the legal department. We'll thoroughly investigate Michael and Amanda's case. And take appropriate measures regarding Patricia's pension and residence. The scent of roses drifted on the evening breeze. Elizabeth took a deep breath. This was the beginning of her new life. She would never cry again. Because no one would ever hurt her again. That night, Elizabeth sat alone in the master bedroom of her new home, quietly sipping champagne. The moonlight reflected in her crystal baccarat glass sparkled like diamonds. The battles would continue tomorrow. Divorce proceedings, company reconstruction, and building a new life. But she was no longer afraid. Outside the window, the full moon illuminated the garden. The white roses radiated an almost divine brilliance in its light, as if blessing her victory. Elizabeth touched the diamond necklace given to her by her father. Everything had been planned for this moment. The next morning, as sunlight streamed into the Oakwood Heights mansion, Elizabeth's phone began to ring. The screen showed Michael. She quietly answered. I want to talk. Michael's voice had completely lost yesterday's arrogance. Will you give me one last chance? All right, Elizabeth answered calmly. In the study, in 30 minutes. At 8 a.m., the heavy mahogany door opened and Michael appeared. His expensive suit from last night was gone, replaced by worn casual wear. Everything was my mistake. It's too late. Elizabeth didn't even turn around from her position by the window. All the documents are already prepared. Divorce agreement, waiver of property rights, and conditions for withdrawing charges. Elizabeth, As Michael tried to step closer, the study door opened again. Amanda burst in with a tear-stained face. Please, one more chance. How vulgar, Elizabeth's voice rang out cold as ice. Do you still think such acting will work? In the living room, Mother Patricia was waiting. She too was dressed in simple clothes. Beth, please. We're family. Somehow. Family? Elizabeth finally turned to face them. Who was by my side when I was suffering through fertility treatments? Mother, you abandoned me after father died. My sister stole my husband and embezzled company funds. What part of this is family? Mother fell to her knees, prostrating herself. Forgive me. I was wrong. Sister, Amanda also collapsed to the floor. I'll return everything. The embezzled money too. Michael could only stand there in silence. His father-in-law's verdict from last night still rang in his ears. Expulsion from the company, confiscation of shares, and the possibility of criminal charges. This is my final act of mercy, Elizabeth pointed to the documents on the desk. If you accept all conditions, we'll forego criminal charges. But never show yourselves before me again. Michael timidly approached the documents. This is... Yes, relinquishment of all assets. Of course, you'll still pay child support for your secret child. You're leaving Boston? Yes. I have a friend in Chicago. Fine, Elizabeth declared coldly. Amanda, the lawyers have already prepared your repayment plan. Monthly payments will be 60% of your salary. It will take 20 years. Amanda's face turned pale. 20 years. Naturally. It's $5.36 million. With interest. Mother was still prostrate on the floor. I've arranged a small apartment father left for you, Mother. Minimum pension. No more luxuries will be allowed. The three silently signed the documents one by one. This would be their final encounter. Elizabeth calmly checked each page. Goodbye, she announced matter-of-factly. This is the end. Never appear before me again. After they left, Elizabeth quietly opened the study window. Morning light streamed in with fresh air. The roses in the garden bloomed more vibrantly than ever. Just then, her phone rang. It was from her father-in-law. The company matters are all settled, Richard's voice carried relief. The board unanimously approved your appointment as vice president. Thank you, Father, Elizabeth answered with genuine gratitude. In the afternoon, she was arranging new houseplants in the room. Mary, her voice calling the housekeeper, had regained its gentleness. Let's start renovating Michael's rooms. The study will become my workroom, and the bedroom will be a yoga room. Yes, madam, Mary's expression showed relief. It's the beginning of a new life. At dusk, Elizabeth was alone in the garden tending to the roses. The white roses gleamed in the setting sun. While gently pruning damaged branches, she reflected. This wasn't the end. It was the true beginning of a new life. At night, she stepped out onto the master bedroom terrace. Boston's nightscape sparkled like jewels. In her hand, the finest French champagne. The diamond necklace from her father cast an elegant gleam in the moonlight. Tomorrow would begin new battles. As vice president of Wilson Enterprises, she would bring fresh wind to Boston's real estate industry. No one would ever hurt her again. She stood in a place she had seized through her own power. The scent of roses drifted on the night breeze. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Tomorrow, she would order new furniture. Every room would be redecorated to her taste. This wasn't anyone else's. This was her castle alone. 1 year later, in early summer, the Oakwood Heights mansion had gained even more elegant radiance. The garden roses bloomed more magnificently than ever, and the newly installed fountain sparkled in the morning sunlight. Elizabeth was enjoying her morning coffee in the study as usual. The Wall Street Journal's front page featured an article about her. Wilson Enterprises shows recovery through female VP's innovative methods. Since her appointment, she had promoted environmentally conscious, sustainable real estate development, bringing new wins to the industry. Miss Mary quietly knocked on the door. A newspaper from Chicago. Opening the article, she saw Michael's figure. Gone was his luxury suit appearance, replaced by a tired expression as he worked at a small real estate company. The headline, "Former Wilson Enterprises Executive Struggles with Fresh Start," told the whole story. Rumors about Amanda occasionally reached her ears. Working as a receptionist at a small beauty salon in New York while struggling with monthly repayments. Her sister, once draped in luxury brands, would never return. Mother had started living alone in a small suburban apartment. They said she was living a modest life, participating in church volunteer activities. The former social butterfly was now just a memory. Elizabeth, her father-in-law Richard, stopped her at the office. "Let's begin preparing you as the next president. The board supports you." She quietly nodded. Over the past year, she had devoted herself entirely to restoring the company's credibility and improving performance. Those efforts were steadily bearing fruit. "And," Richard continued, somewhat bashfully, "there's someone I'd like you to meet at next week's charity party. My son's former classmate, now an associate professor at Harvard Business School." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Father, it's not yet time." "I understand," Richard said kindly. "But life can bring unexpected encounters. I want you to find new happiness." At dusk, Elizabeth was taking deep breaths in her newly installed yoga room. From the window, she could see Boston's cityscape. Her life had changed dramatically since that night a year ago. On weekends, she hosted mentoring programs for young entrepreneurs. Supporting women struggling in the real estate industry had become her new mission. At last week's lecture, Harvard Business School students listened intently. "Miss, Mary brought in dinner. The chef has prepared a special course tonight." White roses adorned the elegant dining table set up on the terrace. The wine was a 1982 Bordeaux, her father's favorite. The deep red liquid in the glass sparkled beautifully in the sunset. After dinner, Elizabeth walked in the garden. The scent of roses drifted on the evening breeze. In her white dress, she looked like a garden fairy. Her phone rang. The screen showed James Harvard. It was from the associate professor her father-in-law wanted to introduce. About next week's party. His gentle male voice made her heart flutter slightly. In the moonlight, Elizabeth smiled quietly. Life moves in unexpected directions. The painful past had made her stronger. And now, a new door was about to open. Back in her study, she opened the proposal for a new project. Sustainable Community Initiative. This would be her next challenge. Creating new value for society through environmentally friendly residential development. Outside the large windows, the full moon gently illuminated the garden. The white roses radiated divinely in its light. Elizabeth touched the diamond necklace given by her father. "I'm happy," she whispered quietly. "I've finally found true happiness in the real sense." Tomorrow would bring new battles. But she was no longer afraid. In this mansion, in this rose garden, she would walk her own path in life. Because this was a happiness that could never be taken away from her.